Donald Trump told America he had a massive plan. A plan so powerful and financially game-changing that he claimed it would transform the entire country. He called it Liberation Day. Standing in the Rose Garden, he promised Americans that his tariffs would bring in more money than the nation had ever seen before. He described it as the greatest economic moment in modern American history. Then the Supreme Court reviewed the documents, and the entire thing started falling apart. Here is what really happened. On February 20th, 2026, 6 Supreme Court justices examined Donald Trump's tariff program and reached the exact same conclusion. They said he never had the legal authority to do it. Not a single justice disagreed on the central issue. The court ruled 6-3 that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the law Trump relied on to enforce his sweeping global tariffs, never gave any president the authority to place taxes on American imports. It was not even considered a close decision. It was not some minor technical mistake. The court said Trump's actions violated the United States Constitution at a fundamental level. And then the number appeared. 7 trillion vanished instantly. That was the amount of projected federal revenue erased the moment the ruling came down. Not a rough estimate, not a budget guess, a full $1. 7 trillion that the Congressional Budget Office had already built into America's financial future. The Trump administration had been counting on that money to make its economic projections work, and it disappeared in a single morning because 6 Supreme Court justices actually read the law. But here is the part most people missed. None of this came out of nowhere. The warning signs had been building for months. Back in May 2025, a panel of federal trade court judges unanimously ruled that the emergency authority tariffs were illegal. Unanimously. Then in August, the Court of Appeals agreed with them. Then in November, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments, and the questions coming from the bench were clearly hostile toward the government's position. At every stage, the legal record was practically screaming that this entire system was going to collapse. Yet the Trump administration kept collecting the money anyway. By the time the Supreme Court finally ruled, the federal government had already collected $166 billion from American businesses and consumers through tariffs that were unconstitutional the entire time. Now that $166 billion could potentially have to be paid back, that is the part that sent shockwaves through Treasury officials, budget analysts, and fiscal watchdogs across Washington because the court did not just shut down future revenue. It opened the door to refunds for the past as well. The U.S. Court of International Trade looked at the ruling and made it clear that all importers of record were entitled to benefit from the decision. That means businesses that paid those tariffs, passed the costs on to consumers, and watched their profit margins collapse for nearly a year may now return to the federal government demanding their money back. Think about what that means for a second. The administration built an entire fiscal strategy around this revenue. They told budget analysts the money was real. They told the Congressional Budget Office it was stable. They allowed deficit projections to reflect it. And now the government could be forced to write checks to reverse every dollar it collected. Here is the number that should have every American paying attention. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget ran the projections after the ruling and found that without the tariff revenue, the national debt is now projected to hit $58 trillion by 2036. Not $56 trillion, but $58 trillion. The gap between those numbers, created by this single Supreme Court ruling, represents a financial path the country has never experienced before. Deficits climbing to 1% of GDP, $3 trillion in new borrowing every single year for an entire decade. And Donald Trump is the one who put America on that path. Not through bad luck, not by accident. Through a strategy that 6 Supreme Court justices, including 3 appointed by Trump himself, said was unconstitutional from the beginning. Then came the next phase of the story, and this is where things became even more revealing. Within hours of the ruling, the Trump administration began scrambling for a replacement. They announced emergency Section 122 tariffs, a temporary 10% global levy that a president can impose for up to 150 days under a different law. Officials said they would raise it to 15%. They claimed they would recover the lost revenue and make the numbers work again. Analysts immediately did the calculations. At 10%, the Section 122 tariffs would generate roughly $35 billion over those 150 days. But the original emergency tariffs would have generated around $65 billion during the same period, less than half, and even over an entire decade. If those Section 122 tariffs somehow became permanent, they would still only generate around $925 billion, nowhere near the $1. $7 trillion that was lost. Not even close. And now those replacement tariffs are being challenged in court too. What the documents are really showing is simple. This was never a carefully built plan. It was a gamble. A gamble based on a legal theory that professional trade lawyers had been warning for more than a year was constitutionally weak. A gamble the administration kept doubling down on even after federal courts struck it down twice before the Supreme Court ever became involved. A gamble where the stakes were not casino chips or corporate profits. The stakes were the financial future of the United States of America. And Trump lost. The Supreme Court did not just reject the tariff program itself. It rejected the entire idea that a president could use emergency powers to reshape the global trading system through executive order alone. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the opinion and was joined by Sotomayor, Kagan, Gorsuch, Barrett, and Jackson. That is not a partisan lineup. That is the court sending one man a direct message in the clearest language possible that the power to tax belongs to Congress, not the White House, not the Oval Office, and not a single person holding a pen. But here is the part almost nobody in political coverage is saying directly. Look at the timeline. Trump stood in the Rose Garden surrounded by flags and charts and claimed these tariffs would generate so much money that America would finally start winning again. He said the country had been ripped off for decades. He promised the era of being taken advantage of was over. He spoke about more than $1 trillion in tariff revenue, as if it was already sitting inside the Treasury, while his own legal team was being warned by nearly every serious trade attorney in Washington that the authority he claimed did not exist. While the Court of International Trade was already building a legal record that would eventually destroy his position. While the evidence kept piling up that this was never truly a revenue strategy, but a performance. And ordinary Americans paid the price for that performance. Every company importing goods paid those tariffs and passed the costs on to consumers. Prices increased. Supply chains were disrupted. Businesses made major financial decisions based on a tariff structure that the Supreme Court has now erased. And now those same companies are dealing with chaos once again because the replacement tariffs are temporary, expire within weeks, and still face major legal challenges. There is another document people need to understand. The Congressional Budget Office released its February 2026 baseline projection only days before the Supreme Court ruling. That official federal budget forecast treated the tariff revenue as a stable and ongoing source of government income. It represented the government's own public expectations for the future. Then the Supreme Court ruling made that document outdated within less than 24 hours. America's own fiscal plan was invalidated by America's own Supreme Court before the ink had even dried. That is what $1 $7 trillion exposure actually looks like in real life. It does not happen all at once. It arrives slowly as people begin realizing that the foundation of a major economic strategy was built on sand, that the projections were never solid, that the revenue was never guaranteed, and that the promises were never based on what the law actually allowed. Trump knew the courts were watching. He had already seen the lower court rulings. His administration had submitted legal briefs arguing that the emergency powers law gave him unlimited authority to impose any tariff at any rate for any reason, as long as he declared an emergency. 6 Supreme Court justices said that argument had absolutely no merit. The court wrote that no law authorizing the president to regulate imports could automatically be interpreted as granting the separate constitutional power to tax. Taxation is different. The Constitution says so clearly. Congress never handed that authority over, and no presidential declaration changes that reality. Now attention is turning toward what happens next. Legal observers are watching the administration's Section 301 investigations very closely as officials attempt to create a new tariff structure capable of surviving court scrutiny. The process is moving faster than almost any trade investigation in modern history. Critics argue it is moving far too quickly to be legitimate, even faster than the China tariffs from Trump's first term that took nearly a year to develop. The timeline has become so compressed that legal scholars are already preparing new court challenges. The same pattern appears to be repeating itself once again. Move quickly, claim authority, collect the money, wait for the courts to intervene. But the courts have now established a clear standard, and every judge in America just watched the Supreme Court declare that the administration's most ambitious economic program was unconstitutional from the very first day. That signal does not disappear simply because the administration starts using a different legal statute. The number remains $7 trillion. The ruling is now part of the official record. The fiscal trajectory has been documented. The projections have been published. And the gap between what was promised and what the law actually allowed is now permanently written into American legal history. Trump was not exposed by a political opponent or by a hostile media outlet. He was exposed by 6 Supreme Court justices, including 3 he personally appointed, reading the documents his administration had ignored ever since the first federal judge ruled against him. The loss is real. The financial exposure is real. And America will likely be dealing with the consequences for years. Another court date is already approaching. The Section 122 tariffs are set to expire within weeks. The Section 301 investigations are being challenged. Refund lawsuits are growing. And somewhere inside Washington, every budget analyst who warned about this program is now going back through the numbers, recalculating the damage, and trying to understand how a strategy this massive, this public, and this legally fragile was ever presented to the American people as certainty. The answer has always been sitting inside the documents. And now that the Supreme Court has forced those documents into the spotlight, everyone is finally reading them. The real dollar. 7 trillion question is no longer whether Trump's tariff program was legal because the court already answered that. The question now is who ends up paying for the consequences. And as always, when a plan built on unstable ground finally collapses, the people left carrying the cost are the same people who were promised something that never truly existed. The businesses that rebuilt supply chains around these tariffs, the consumers who paid higher prices, the budget analysts who were handed unrealistic projections and told to make them work, the country that was promised an economic transformation and instead received a constitutional crisis. Every document exists, every ruling exists, every step in the timeline exists, and every single piece of it points toward the exact same conclusion. A strategy that was exposed before it even truly began. A collapse that became unavoidable the moment the first tariff order was signed. And a number, 7 trillion, that will follow this administration into every hearing, every court challenge, and every budget debate for years ahead. Stay close because the next ruling is approaching faster than most people are publicly admitting, and when it arrives, the number could become even larger.